thank you all for joining me. Um, One thing that I'd like you to know is that there are going to be times when I hope that we are interacting, and those interactions will mostly take place through chat. So you might pull up your chat box so that we can do that. So today, I'd like you to join me for a walk down a particular path. And this path takes us on a journey through connection to nature. So tonight we're going to explore why, that is, why we need to connect to nature. And then we're going to explore how we connect to nature. And on this journey of exploring how, we're going to stop in 4 different territories. The territories of intellectual, sensory, emotional, and spiritual connection to nature. So during the course of this journey, I invite you to reflect upon your own connections to nature and really how you can share connections with others. So our first stop on this nature trail is why. Why connect to nature? And there are numerous reasons, but quite compelling one is that time in nature can improve our physical health. It can raise our levels of vitamin D, which in turn strengthens our immune system and our bones. It can also improve our distance vision and lower the chance of nearsightedness, increase our energy levels, and increase the activity of cancer-fighting white blood cells. So there's research that shows that hiking twice a day for just 3 days can increase your white blood cell count around an average of 40%. And that count stays about 15% higher even a month later. The studies suggest being in nature, even just seeing nature, wards off feelings of exhaustion and increases our vitality. So researcher Ming Kuo has created this diagram of the potential pathways through which time in nature can improve our physiological states and overall health. So from phytoncides, which are antimicrobial compounds that trees can release into the air, to the shade provided by a tree, natural areas offer many ingredients for improved health. So connecting to nature can also improve our mental health. Research shows that our stress levels fall within minutes of seeing green spaces. It improves our mood and reduces anxiety and depression. Now, the way this works is that being in nature can activate the part of our brain called the anterior cingulate gyrus. And that mediates our outlook on life and also our emotional stability. It can also activate our basal ganglia, kind of the center of our happy memories. Research also shows that nature makes us nicer. We can become nicer by enhancing our social interactions. Nature can create stronger community bonds and closer relationships. So people are actually more caring and generous when exposed to nature. And Richard Ryan, one of the researchers in this area, says that we have a natural connection with living things, and nature is something within which we flourish. So having it be more a part of our lives is critical, especially when we live and work in built environments. Now, nature not only helps our physical and mental health, it also impacts our cognitive abilities. Research shows that being in nature can encourage our imagination and creativity and aid in our cognitive and intellectual development. So we also know that being in nature can improve our performance on tests of critical thinking, improve our higher order processing of information, can help us incorporate more knowledge into our long-term memory, and improve our work performance and satisfaction. And also, engagement with nature can help us learn to make detailed and accurate observations, particularly if guided by a good teacher out in the woods. And it can help us understand ecology at different scales, from the scale of the individual to the population to the scale of a community or an entire ecosystem. I think, at a deeper level, many of us hold an awareness of the level of cognition and examination that can come from being in nature. So one of the most famous examples of this in Western literature comes from Henry David Thoreau in his book, Walden. And this, Thoreau says explicitly, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. So even today, the reflections that Thoreau made at Walden Pond have the power to spur our own self-examination and contemplation. Connecting to nature can help ensure that we truly live. So this brings us to another reason why we should connect to nature and help others connect to it. Nature connection can lead us to be better stewards of the environment. So in my work at Duke, I sometimes stretch beyond my ecological research and engage in social science research. And my former and brilliant student, Eudora Miao, and we have explored the concept of environmental identity development, particularly among students at Duke. And here's why. In recent years, researchers have begun to investigate how we encourage pro-environmental behaviors. Now, historically, most environmental educators have operated under the paradigm that knowledge about the environment, is like teaching others about the natural world or ecological systems, will lead to awareness, and that teaching others about the natural world or ecological systems will then lead to sustainable action. But research indicates that this is not always the case. So scholars began to look at a new concept, environmental identity. Environmental identity develops through a longer and more complex process, but it can predict pro-environmental behavior more fully. So we want to cultivate this thing, this environmental identity, particularly if we want people to act sustainably. But how do you do that? How do you cultivate environmental identity? Research tells us that those with strong environmental identities have a lot in common. Usually they've been influenced by family members, teachers, or their social sphere more generally. They might have been influenced by books and movies and other media, but more relevant to today's topic, we also see that folks that care about the environment have typically had significant life experiences in nature or youthful experience outdoors and in relatively pristine environments. So this is where nature connection comes in. Not only do environmentally committed folks have these significant life experiences in nature, but they have more types of connections and nature-based experiences. So these now committed folks spent more time in nature. They devoted time to studying natural systems, and they've also observed and witnessed more habitat alteration. So these experiences change their behavior, and in fact, connecting to nature results in behavior change for the environment and pro-social behavior. So let's go back to our path. We've talked about why we should connect to nature, but we also need to talk about how we connect to nature. We can connect to nature in myriad ways, and today we'll explore those territories of intellectual, sensory, emotional, and spiritual connection. So since we've been talking about research and cognition, let's start with our intellectual connection to nature. So I want to define this intellectual connection. So intellect is the faculty of reasoning and understanding objectively, especially with regard to abstract or academic matters. And this is typically those things that we've gleaned from academic and Western scientific knowledge as defined by the Western Enlightenment paradigm. So it's those things that we read and learned from history and science classes. So this is where the interaction comes in. In the chat box, I'd like us to take a moment to explore our own intellectual connections to nature. So take a look at this image, and in the chat, write down every fact that you can think of related to it. Every fact you've gleaned about leaves, or leaves from this particular group or this particular species. White oak. Nice. Green. Insect damage. Edible acorn, important for native peoples. Color, green. Lobes, great. What other facts? Yep, it's an oak. It's a keystone species. Distinct midrib. Photosynthesis. Oaks support a ton of caterpillars that feed birds. Yes, Ptolemy's Nosaurus shouted at. Number one for wildlife. Life. Great. Thank you. So now let's see if we can deepen our intellectual connection to this leaf. So we might do that by learning facts. So you might find a teacher or a video or a book to tell you that this leaf is from a white oak tree, Quercus alba, with Quercus deriving presumably from Celtic and meaning beautiful tree, and alba deriving from Latin and meaning white. Then you might turn to the study of botany and learn how to describe a leaf, as some of you already have, saying that it's simple, alternately arranged on a leaf stem, that its margins are both smooth and lobes, that has 7 to 11 lobes on average. Maybe you describe the base of this leaf as acuminate. You might then turn to the study of ecology to learn that the white oak occurs in a range of habitats and soil types. Or you might turn to the discipline of forestry to learn its economic value. Learn that the bole of a white oak can sell for $390 per 1,000 board feet. So that's kind of the equivalent of a tree that's like 28 inches in diameter and 64 feet high. Or you might turn to history to learn that the British and American naval fleets were largely constructed from white oaks from North America. Or you might turn to enology, the science of winemaking, to learn that white oak barrels are used around the world to age wine. Or maybe we turn to literature, get a sense of deep time, and we learn from Nancy Ross Hugo that white oaks spend 200 years growing, 200 years living, and 200 years dying. Now, intellectual connection to nature can also take another form, the form, for instance, of citizen science. So before we talk specifically about citizen science, I want to back up a bit. And we know from the literature that, quote, while scientific knowledge is important, connectedness and emotional relationship with nature matter most as a predictor of ecological behavior, unquote. So while there are many ways to connect to nature, citizen science emphasizes two routes. First, it emphasizes the intellectual connection. But citizen science also activates a second route of connection, the route of feeling like we've made a difference. So now we understand why citizen science allows us to connect to nature, but we really need to think about what it is. Citizen science or community science is a route for public participation and collaboration in scientific research. And there are so many projects out there for people to participate in. One well-known project involves the program eBird. Data is collected by people that like to bird. They have this app, eBird, and it helps researchers identify bird conservation areas. The Great Sunflower Project allows people to find pollinators in their own backyard. Mammal Web sets people up to camera trap mammals and to catalog mammalian diversity. Tree Snap is a program that allows researchers really to evaluate the health of trees and then use the data to create better tree breeding programs. So I want to tell you a little bit about a project that I helped launch. That's the Duke Forest Herpetology Community Science Project. And this project was born in 2018 from a desire to rework the Duke Forest approach to wildlife management. And the first step in doing this is to build up a baseline understanding of the animal populations in the forest. And the data collected helps the forest answer basic questions like what animals still live here, when are they active, how many are there, and these questions then help the Duke Forest management team protect wildlife, and it helps ecologists working at Duke, me, understand better animal distributions and wildlife connectivity. So this project in particular is focused on monitoring herpetofauna, or reptiles and amphibians. So to participate in this project, each citizen science is placed on a team, and at least 2 members from each team are responsible for completing 1 monitoring visit every week for 14 weeks. And a monitoring visit consists of both field data collection and also smartphone or computer-based data entry. Usually the total time commitment is something like 1 or 2 hours per week. Now the beauty of a project like this is that it forms intellectual connections and it goes beyond that. Citizen science has a lot of benefits, including increasing the scale of ecological studies, increasing community inclusion in local issues, creating large and long-term data sets, increasing social capital and public support for conservation, and it also changes people. It can change attitudes and behavior, increase scientific literacy, and perhaps most importantly, it can forge strong relationships with nature. One way it can do this is by forging another type of connection to nature, sensorial connection. So let's explore that next. Sensorial or sensory connection is a very impactful way of connecting to nature. Sensory experience with nature helps us connect at a deeper level, and it strengthens our memories. Since we're sensory beings, our senses in nature can ground us and help us make meaning. But when we say sensory experience, what do we really mean here? Like, we're familiar with the 5 senses. We've got sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. But we also have additional senses, like our vestibular sense or sense of balance, or our proprioceptive sense, like the awareness of our body in space. We likely have more senses or subsenses. A sense that allows us to sense color and temperature. Some people call this the radiation senses. We have senses that make us sensitive to gravity or wind pressure. We have types of feeling senses. We might also say we have mental senses, ones that register pain or help us identify a sense of self or other ways of knowing. So I want us to take a moment now and explore and deepen at least one of our senses together and see how we can apply that to connect to nature. So first thing I'd like to do is employ visual thinking strategies. Now these strategies are often more comfortable to us when we're using art. So we're going to start there first. So in the chat box, please tell me what you see, focusing on nouns, colors, shapes, light, and spatial relationships. But don't give me any interpretation yet. What do you see? See some light, perhaps late afternoon light, maps, yellow, golden, red jacket, woman smiling, man, woman, light, white bonnet, scarf. Talk to me about shapes a little. We have rectangle on the map, straight lines, okay, carnation or frilly sleeves, diamonds in the window. Good observation. All right. Now tell me the story of what is happening. Like the who, what, when, where, why, and how. But when you begin to tell me the story in the chat box, it's like, I think these are two people. Tell me why. What did you see that has led you to draw that conclusion? You could start by guessing what the relationship is between these two people and then seeing why you think that might be. You can also guess when this is and what clues you have as to when. The map there makes us think about exploration. Maybe they're at a cafe and they went for coffee. And the last thing is, what do you wonder? Tell me a question you have about what you're seeing. Yeah, what is their relationship? What is she anticipating? Right. So for those of you that are wondering, we're looking at Jan Vermeer's painting, Soldier and the Laughing Girl. And this is from 1658. So now I want to explore the same visual thinking strategy with a scene from the natural world. So let's do this again. In the chat box, please tell me what you see, focusing on nouns, colors, shapes, light, and spatial relationships. No interpretations yet. Got bison, birds, little birds, free ride, grass and sagebrush, brown shades, ratty fur. Right now, tell me the story of what's happening. When and where are we in particular? When and where are we, and how do you know? What did you see to lead you to draw the conclusions? It's a lot of grass, so it seems like a grassland or a prairie. What part of the world or country? Southwest dry prairie. Fall or early spring. Here we go. Annette, tell me a little bit more about that. What makes you say that? So let's explore some of these questions. One question is, what time of year is in the photo? And how do we know? My guess is that it's fall. And the reason I think that is because of these starlings. They're in what I would call winter plumage. Winter plumage, you know, but is not snowy yet, right? So that makes me think it's probably fall. And then by the time spring comes around, these birds get pretty black. Also the dried dark grass, right? It's not new fresh growth. That indicates that it's probably fall. We look at the quality of the bison's fur. indicates fall. So then we also want to ask ourselves, where are we and how do we know? So someone noticed sagebrush. Sagebrush is native to the western United States. So we've got this thicker grass. So it's likely that we're not in the southwest, but the northwest. We can start digging into the scene. What is the relationship, like we did with the soldier and the laughing girl? What is the relationship between the bison and the starlings? And how do we know? Well, maybe if we were in this place in real life, maybe we'd see the starlings feeding on bugs from the bison or off the ground. Maybe they're using the bison as a perch. We might also ask ourselves, what do we know about this bison? Well, for obvious reasons, it's male, but males also have straighter horns and fuller beards like this one. All right, I also want to guide you through another exercise, one of deep noticing. This is also one that can be powerful when you're outside with a group. So please imagine that we have gone for a silent walk to this spot. And as you walked, you took time to notice, to look closely. Now we've stopped here. And we're looking into the woods. So let's do that mindfully. First, look into the foreground close to you. Then consciously look into the middle ground. Then look as far as you can see. Notice the colors. What colors do you see? Are there greens, browns? What types of browns do you see? Are the greens truly green? Now notice the light and shadows. Are they long? Are they light or dark? Where do the shadows fall? Where's the light fall? Where's the light absent? Now notice the shapes. What are the shapes of the leaves? What are the shapes of the tree trunks? What other shapes do you see? Are there shapes on the ground in this scene? Are there different shapes up high? You might notice texture too. How many textures can you find? What might the bark of the closest tree feel like? What might the highest leaves feel like? Now expand out real big now. How's the landscape connected? Do the shadows overlap? Do textures touch? What connections are you seeing? What is still? And what might you imagine is moving? How would things move in this scene? In harmony or in contrast? So another way that we can engage in a sensory experience is to walk a trail of beauty. So in silence, you and a partner will walk a trail together. And as you walk, like slowly, quietly, deliberately, you'd stop now and again to silently show each other at least 3 beautiful things. When you see beauty, and when your partner shows you something they find beautiful, then you attend to it deeply and with care. You pause. We can also attend to our sense of touch by doing simple activities like walking barefoot on soft, damp grass, or stopping to touch a dry, crackling leaf, or closing our eyes and attending to the textures of a tree. We can do this with kids by pairing up and blindfolding a partner and leading them to a tree. Then you can have the blindfolded person explore the tree with their hands, being careful that we keep folks safe. And then walk your partner who's blindfolded away from the tree, remove the blindfold, and see if your partner can find that tree again, just based on how it felt. If you want to attend to a sense of hearing, we can begin to create a sound map. So let's do that now. I want you to close your eyes and listen to all the sounds around you. I'm going to pause mute myself for a second. Make sure then when you close your eyes to see which sounds are closest to you. Gradually move your awareness further and further from your body. And craft a mental map of the sounds. So the next step after this would be to actually create a rough physical map of all that you hear. This is really a beautiful activity to do with folks that are just getting in tune with nature's sounds and rhythms. It's great to do as an introduction to identifying frog calls or bird songs. Now we can also attend to our sense of smell. Now, research shows that ambient scents from the great outdoors can have wonderful effects on us. So smelling flowers can make us feel more calm and alert, also boosts our mood. And other natural scents are particularly tied to feelings of happiness, particularly the scent of fresh air in the summer. The association of scent and memory and emotion is particularly strong, and this provides us with a good segue now to explore a new territory of connection to nature, the territory of emotion. So emotional connection has been defined as, I'm going to quote here, a positive emotional bond with nature, which is more or less consciously experienced by the subject. But emotional connection isn't really that easy to define. Researchers have developed a taxonomy, which I'm trying to show you here to help us understand the concept better. And in this taxonomy, the best examples of emotions are internal mental conditions that have an affective focus rather than a behavioral or cognitive focus. So the following words are examples of internal affective state emotion terms, like aggravated or embarrassed or guilty or happy. We also know that researchers see a correlation between those who spend time immersed in nature and higher levels of empathy, not only toward other humans, but other species. So contact, emotion, meaning, and compassion, with the latter mediated by engagement with natural beauty. These all serve as predictors of overall connection with nature. The one practice for developing emotional connection to nature is called loving contact. In this, you find an object that you're drawn to and you make contact with it in a loving and open way. Another means of developing emotional connection to nature is through storytelling. So let's look at this week. Please, in the chat, provide a one-word description of its meaning. What does it signify? What does this leaf signify to you? Nature. Food. Very hungry caterpillar. Growth. Wonderful. So I'm going to tell you my story now. Oh, nurture. Love it. So this is a bur oak leaf. And for me, it has a strong connection to my sense of place. The place I still consider home, even though I haven't lived there in over 20 years, Northern Illinois. Now, Illinois is dotted with this species, the bur oak. And when I was a teenager, my mom and I both worked at a nature center. And over the years, even after I left home, my mom continued to deepen her relationship with and fall in love with a particular big bur oak. Now, eventually, my mom and dad, they moved down to North Carolina too. And after my mom had been away from home for about 4 years, and me much longer, we went back to visit. And we took my son to the nature center and went to see this particular big bur oak. But my mom's bur oak had fallen. Hundreds of years of history and our personal history laid on the ground. And my son, young and intuitive, sensing the moment, went up to the stump and hugged it. And that was the slide that you saw before this one. Later, I drew this bur oak leaf, kind of caught up in memory and nostalgia, love and hope. And so let's do this activity again. Please provide a one-word description of this leaf's meaning. What does it signify now? Aging and love. Remembrance. An old friend. Yes. So we have one more territory to visit on our journey this evening. And that's the territory of spiritual connection to nature. When we talk about spiritual connection to nature, we can think about it along two continua. One is a continuum of human to earth centeredness. So a continuum from spiritual practices that are egocentric and elevate humans and their experiences to spiritual practices that are ecocentric, ones that emphasize action and flow with nature and kind of a unity of man and nature. When forced to put spiritual practices on a continuum, researchers often associate Judeo-Christianity with more egocentric connection, and deep ecology and North American indigenous practices to more ecocentric connections. But Western, Eastern, and indigenous cultures are not monoliths in terms of spiritual practices, and they all have practices and belief systems that vary along this continuum. The spiritual connection to nature also varies along another continuum, from ideational to sensate, which means from spiritual practices that are more materialistic to science-focused ways of knowing. So we can really think of this as a continuum from like concepts of unchangeability and absoluteness and mystic inner knowing. This is all ideational. To the sensate, which is really represented by a more immediate sense of life, these strong experiences of joy and grief and progress and dynamism. So let's first explore an approach to nature that is rooted in Judeo-Christianity, but brings in elements of sensory experience and infinity. That is the approach of the American transcendentalists. One experience that many people have in nature is a sense of smallness and connectedness. And this is described by Ralph Waldo Emerson through the metaphor of the transparent eyeball, which really represents the ability to see and understand the interconnectedness of all things, especially after time spent in nature. So the metaphor of the transparent eyeball also means that in nature, people can obtain a clearer understanding of God. Now, this viewpoint, shared by many transcendentalists in particular, but by people across the globe, suggests that being in nature gives a person greater perspective and thus a sense of oneness and healing. So Emerson says, quote, "In the woods, I feel that nothing can befall me in life which nature cannot repair." We can also consider spiritual connection to nature from the perspective of contemporary Western practices that borrow and grow from indigenous and Eastern practices. So one such practice is called feeling the spirit of the sky. And this was a practice developed by Dr. Winfried Sedoff. So I'm going to guide you through it. And I want you to note that this practice is taken verbatim from Sedoff's work. So feel spirit of the sky. Feel its openness and its smooth. Its peace and its rage. And its calming, infinite nighttime beauty. Imagine a spirit in the dark clouds, rolling in to give life-giving water to the earth. Imagine the spirit of the sun giving warmth and light to us all. Notice how the spirit of the sky feels for you. Now, Setup also offers us another practice in this sub-territory of spirituality, and that's called noticing the smaller spirits. So Setup asks us to consider what children, and by children, Setup means stars and planets, worlds, animals, plants, and people. What children are part of the greater whole? And then Setup guides us to imagine all of these smaller parts of life on Earth and all that we notice in space. And then thinking about these child spirits, the spirits of animals and plants and people, combining and coming together as part of a greater whole. So in this, no one part is greater than another. Each of these parts have the same heart and spirit. And we can feel the spirit of kinship that we share with each other and the earth. Now, another practice that has deep cross-cultural echoes is to notice the spirit of your ancestors in nature. So think of an ancestor or an elder that has passed, that had a deep connection to nature. I'm doing that here. This is my great-grandmother, Agnes Shiva. There's so many photos of her with animals and just sitting in fields. She was alive. All the photos of her that we have are particularly around the period of like 1915 and 1920. So bring this person, your own ancestor or an elder that you know, and bring that person to your heart. And imagine them in the natural environments. And consider what the earth meant to them. And consider how their connection to earth might have differed from your own. And you might thank them for ensuring that you're never alone, and thank them for their role in helping you be here now, and in giving you the opportunity to connect with nature and others. So it's important to note here that the natural world has long been honored by ancient and indigenous cultures, and that some of these cultures have a deep tradition of thanksgiving. So to honor this spiritual connection and to prepare us for the end of this presentation, I'd like to read parts of the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving address to help us cultivate gratitude. Now the address reads in part, "We now send greetings and thanks to the sun, bringing the light of a new day, the source of all the fires of life. We are all thankful to our mother, the earth, for she gives us all that we need for life. She supports our feet as we walk upon her." We give thanks to all the waters of the world for quenching our thirst and providing us with strength. Now we turn to the vast fields of plant life. As far as the eye can see, the plants grow, working many wonders. They sustain many life forms. We gather our minds together to send greetings and thanks to all the animal life in the world. They have many things to teach us. We gather our minds to greet and thank the enlightened teachers who have come to help throughout the ages. We give thanks for all the love that is still around us. So finally, to close our session before we take questions, I'd like to close with a gesture ritual. Now in person, this would be an echo ritual where we go around the circle and we'd speak a word that it kind of encapsulated our experience during, say, the presentation. And then we kind of bring a gesture forward in the group that encapsulates that word. So let's do this now. Please put a word in the chat that best encapsulates your experience during this presentation. Thankful, thoughtfulness, joy. Now that you have your word in mind, accompany your word with a gesture. You can just do this off camera, just for yourself, but really embody your word. So for me, my word is gratitude, and my gesture to go with gratitude is this. Grateful to all of you. So go ahead and please take a moment to do your gesture as well. So I want to thank you all for your participation tonight. I'm happy to take questions. As we do that, I just want to show you all these references. There is a lot of research that goes into this work. Hundreds, thousands of people contributing to our understanding of nature's benefits and how we connect to it. And I just want to make sure that all of the references that I've used are given their due credit. So thank you so much. I'm happy to answer questions.
Was the Padamashoni, is that one that Robin Wall Kimmerer has shared? Is that her group?
So this particular one is one that the Indigenous Peoples or Native American or American Indian Museum in Washington, D.C. has.
Okay. Oh, neat. Okay. Great.
Yeah, Robin Wall Kimmerer does have some wonderful materials out there for us to draw from as we connect to nature in our own ways.
Okay.
I was recently reviewing a book about herbal medicine, and the author makes the point that all of us have indigenous people in our ancestry, indigenous to somewhere. So he really points out that we're really struggling to relearn what a lot of people have forgotten in the last just few generations, actually.
Yeah. And I really relate to that. Over half my ancestry is Polish, and my Polish family has strong traditions of foraging, collecting mushrooms. They did that in Poland, and then they proceeded to do that when they got to the Midwest as well. And even reading something like Robin Wall Kimmerer's book and thinking about her family's foraging traditions, I saw that connection. It made me think, about my own ancestry.
Yeah, I grew up in a suburb of Cleveland, and in our elementary school, there was a big field next to it And there was these, I guess, Polish and Ukrainian babushka ladies out there with their baskets gathering mushrooms while we were in class.
Okay, well, does anyone else have a comment or a question?
Yes, Nikki, I'm curious, do you have much experience with prescribed fire and how that works with the land and fits in with your thought process and ethos here?
Yeah, so it's been a while, but I used to be pretty active in the prairie restoration community when I was up north, and then I have done some work at Penny's Bend. I don't actually go out and burn anymore, but many of my students are involved in thesis work that involves looking at the effects of burning, those sorts of things. And so for me, fire is something that when we're thinking about folks' connection to nature can be really polarizing. So as a teacher, I tend not to bring fire into my practice, but it is an opportunity to think about renewal and cycles. And I think fire is really, as a critical, we know this from the ecological literature, it's a critical part of ecosystems. So when we think about connection, if we want to emphasize renewal or resilience, personal resilience, and compare that to the resilience of Mother Nature, we might then turn to thinking about fire. Do you have other thoughts about that, your own conceptualization of fire on the landscape?
Well, I own a piece of property and I've done some burning and I've participated on other properties, and it's amazing. You leave the property and you visit it a couple days later and you don't see much, and then a couple more days, and then a couple more days it just pops, and you're like, oh my gosh, this never would have happened without the fire burning through all that leaf litter.
It's amazing. It's an amazing process.
Yeah, the leaf litter just has such a smothering effect at some point, and so it's been pretty neat to observe and participate in it.
So one thing I asked Dr. Cagle about earlier, if she was going to talk at all about the environmental education program. And so I wonder if you might just mention that, about the listserv and what's involved.
Yeah, so North Carolina does have a state certification program in environmental education. It's really easy to find if you look up North Carolina environmental education. There's also the North Carolina Environmental Educators Group. The certification is fantastic because it gives you the opportunity to take classes in a wide variety of areas. It gives you the opportunity to apply some of your skills. And it also teaches you a bit about teaching, about pedagogy as well. I loved the program when I did it because it also gave me an impetus to explore all these places across the states that I never would have explored otherwise. There's a section in the certification program where you can do site visits and get a signature when you go there, and it counts for credit. So I recommend going to the website, checking it out. It's a great program.